Hi everyone, I'm Neil and welcome to our first webinar in the Mastering Digital Change webinar series. While everyone's logging in and just settling themselves in, I thought I'd cover off on a few bits of quick housekeeping. First of all, thank you to everybody that's attending. We've had an amazing response. We've had over 250 people, clients joining us today from Australia, Singapore and beyond. We plan to run a different topic each month. On your screen are details of the next two webinars in the series. Next month, for the business strategy stream, we're talking about digital readiness. Digital transformation in your business requires a right mix of the culture and the resources and processes to make it really work. And this session will look at the ways you can ensure your business is ready to embrace change head-on. Following that, in April for the technical stream, we'll be talking about picking the right content management system for your business. Secondly, a few points about the webinar today. We will be recording the presentation and sending it through to you over the next week. If you want to send it on to colleagues, please feel free to forward that on. We're very keen to make the session as interactive as possible, so please feel free to send us any questions or comments using the chat box that's on the right-hand side of your screen, or just send an email through to me. My email is on the screen now. We do have a question and answer session at the end of today, so we hope to address as many questions as we can. Any that we don't, we will respond to you when we send out a follow-up email. Feel free to tweet along at #RChange. And if you'd like to chat to me directly or Deborah or any of our team after the webinar, please just send me an email and I'll put you in contact. Last bit of housekeeping, we've created a white paper on knowing your audience and we'll also email that to you after the recording, along with the recording after the event today. So it looks like we have a good number of people now logged in. So we'll kick things off. So today's webinar looks at understanding behaviours when creating effective digital strategy and implementation. My name is Neil Shewan from Reading Room Melbourne and I'm your facilitator for today. Our presenter is Deborah Ko. So I'll just give you a quick bit of background on Deborah. Deborah has a PhD in psychology and has specialised in cultural philosophy and the philosophy of internet behaviour. She entered into the world of digital as the head of research at a social media research agency and regularly lectures on digital media, business and psychology. She's currently a digital consultant at Reading Room and particularly focused on looking at the psychological influences in digital design, user experience and content creation. Deborah, welcome.
Thanks for having me. So let's actually just kick this off. If you guys, of course, have any questions, as Neil said, just feel free to leave them in the chat box and we can get back to them at the end. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is about predicting behavior by looking at different things having to do with the psychology of people. So I'll talk a little bit about how this applies to digital psychology. So just a small introduction. This is Reading Room, our huge family over here, and we're growing every single day. I'm actually part of a specialist consultancy group. My domain is psychology and digital behavior, as Neil was talking about. And I tell my friends that I'm the worst type of doctor. I can't prescribe medication and I can't save your life. But what I can do is I can talk to you about why people may act in certain ways online, or I can tell you why Asian consumers don't behave the same as Western consumers and what you can do about it. So let me talk to you about my most favorite subject in the whole world, digital psychology. So what's digital psychology? Well, it's the application of traditional psychological concepts to explain and predict individual attitudes, so things like motivations, values, and how it relates to behaviors in a digital world. So psychology has many applications, as you can see, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I only have 30 minutes. But, and this is not specific to digital, but how they are addressed in digital can be quite unique. So I'll focus on three aspects. The first one is the psychology of persuasive design. So in the white paper that Neil had talked about, I talked a bit about choice, and a lot of people were asking me questions about it because it seems pretty counterintuitive. So it's a great forum to sort of explore this a bit more deeply. Another important area is product and service design. So this has to do with creating products that are really tailored and targeted to your audiences. An interesting area that I think we're pretty unique in being positioned to talk about is the Asian market and understanding cultural nuances that are imperative in getting global business right. And lastly, I'll talk about the psychological tools to optimize user experience. One that I'm excited about is how to create more effective and predictive user personas. So without further ado, let's talk about persuasive design. So how does psychology make businesses smarter about how to give people choice? Let's start off with an experiment. You've just won an all-expenses-paid vacation, and we're giving you some options to choose from. You can only choose one destination. You can either choose from this selection of 4 or this selection. If you are almost anybody, I think you would want to have the 12 options to choose from, not the 4. I would want to have 12 options rather than 4. And I don't really have to tell you why you want to have 12 options, but I can tell you why that's actually worse for you. There are a couple studies like this where people are given these 2 scenarios and the results are unanimous and they're robust. And I would predict that if you were given 12 options, you will be more frustrated in choosing and you'll be less satisfied with your choice in the end. So we'll actually explore why this counterintuitive phenomenon occurs. We'll also look at why this is especially important in making choices in digital, because digital is creating a very self-serving or self-serve culture where people are looking for things on their own. They're making a lot of decisions and choices by themselves. So before I tell you why more choices are worse, I want to just sort of preface this by saying that choices are important. There are a lot of studies to suggest that choice is very important because it gets people engaged and invested whenever they have to choose something. In a 2008 Samsung's campaign, they launched this really successful campaign with Nick Turpin, who's a very famous photographer, and they used it to promote their new camera. So how they do it? They actually allowed people to have control over what the subject, the subject for the photographer. So he would be taking pictures, and if they chose from this picture here, they could just click wherever they wanted, and the most votes would be the next subject of his photographic journey. So just to let you guys know, everyone had clicked on the butt, so his next subject was something having to do with this person's rear end. But why choices can be very bad is when we have too many choices. So the decision-making process is really cognitively challenging. And it's hard for people to evaluate and compare. So one thing that we know about human cognition is that we only have about 7 pieces, we can only hold 7 items in our head at one time. So if you give me, something that has 5 items versus 20 items, it's going to be really hard for me to hold all of that information in my head at the same time. So it's mentally tiring. It also leads to confusion because people really are motivated, especially when they're motivated to make the right decision. People can also get confused. They will be unsatisfied with the process and won't know what to choose in the end because there are these things called, this feeling called regret that people feel when they think that they're making a decision that might not be the good one. So a lot of people will be really scared to make a bad decision. So knowing this, I want to talk a little bit about one of the most interesting experiments that I think they've done on consumers. and it looks at how frustrating it can be to make a decision on a product. So a consumer study from Columbia University actually went to a supermarket to see how choice affected purchases. So bad choices or no choice can lead to can occur if you have too many choices. So in the study, either 6 or 24 jams were presented to people. So that you could taste test different jams. So on one day it was 6 jams, on another day it was 24. And researchers found that when choosing jams out of 24, people reported experiencing more regret over their choice. Other studies have also shown that when fear of regret is too high, people don't want to make a choice at all. So indeed, in the 6 choice condition, 48% purchased jams in the end. So after tasting 1 jam out of 6, people were more likely to buy afterwards, versus in the 24 jam condition, only 12% did. These are just some of examples of how companies can limit the consumer choice for the better. So here you go. So these are all different companies that did this. So limit the options, see greater returns. One of the ones I want you to focus your attention on is the Amazon and Pandora one at the bottom. How do they use digital platforms to help reduce choice? With so many choices, what they do is become excellent curators. They give you recommendations and create easier categories to reduce the pain of choosing. How can we use this knowledge? Well, we can give people easy comparisons. Studies have looked at introducing a third choice that are similar but just different enough to make the other option look awesome. The economists actually cleverly created increased sales by introducing a bad option. But this bad option provided an apples-to-apples comparison to help make a decision in favor of the more expensive option. The Economist.com subscription is hard to compare to print and web subscriptions, but print versus print and web subscription, that's a no-brainer. So as you can see, 84% here have now chosen it, whereas more people are likely to choose in the right-hand column, they're more likely to choose the cheaper option. Secondly, make them feel confident in choosing. People are often driven by anticipated regret when they make decisions. So help them feel like they are making a good decision and then support them when they're making a decision. So for instance, if you look here, you'll see that these many people thought the review was helpful. This is the amount of stars that were given, and this was the average consumer rating. So this helps with reducing regret, and it shows expert recommendations so that people feel like they're making an informed choice. Third, rein in the numbers. So make meaningful categories. There's a study actually conducted at Columbia University that showed that it didn't actually matter if a store sold 331 or 664 magazines. What mattered to buyer satisfaction was the number of categories it had. Many subheadings felt like there were lots of choices, but then within those categories there were few magazines to choose from, so it was a lot easier for people to make a choice. A simple example is actually one of our own projects for Visit England, which addressed what most tourists are faced with, which are too many choices on places to go. By creating a small number of categories and reducing the amount of choices of the categories one could choose from, people had a nice reduced list of interesting places that they could consider. And last but not least, if there have to be a lot of choices, start them off with simple, reduced choices and build up to bigger ones. You don't want to tire them out early because it'll make them frustrated more quickly. Even though booking systems are very complex, Virgin America revamped their booking system, providing people with simple choices at the beginning to make the process less painful. So the next time you think about choice, be smart about the choices you give people and help them make their choices. They'll be grateful for it, and so will your bottom line. So the second one that I want to talk about is product and service design. Where can psychology help? One area that emerged in the last 20 years has challenged some of the long-held beliefs about psychology in about psychology and cultural psychology is addressing how the environment can shape our attitudes, perceptions, and behavior. How can you use this to better understand Asian consumers? So let us talk about the Asian consumer. So this is actually a quote of a saying in Southeast Asia, same, but different. This is actually an advertisement from HSBC showing the same thing on how the same thing can be perceived very differently depending on what culture you're from. Culture can influence how we evaluate things. We can see them the same and interpret them very differently depending on where we're from and what we're familiar with. As a caveat, I will be talking about general differences between Asian and Western cultures. And as many of you may know, not all Asian cultures are the same, and not all Western cultures are the same. I'm from the US, and I know lots of people from Britain and Australia that will tell you that Americans are not identical to Australians or British people. So, nevertheless, there are distinctions that occur on average between Asian and Western cultures that can give you an advantage. Understanding the psychology of different cultures is important because it affects how you address other companies as well as consumers. How do you find partners and investors? How do you speak to consumers? It also affects business strategy. How does a company decide to expand globally? How do you address local differences? One example I want to give about why it's important to understand the unique psychology of culture is the campaign against shark's fin soup. Many conservation groups have stressed how it depletes the species or it's inhumanely obtained. One of the problems is that they're sending the wrong message. As noted in the quote, purchase of the soup is not about taste, it's about status, the status it brings to those who buy it and the honor it is to serve to other people. High-status individuals condemning it has lowered its status among Chinese, and the purchase of shark's fin soup has declined. Knowing the culture helps you avoid sending the wrong message to your target audiences. How do you send the right message then? How do you incorporate our knowledge of status into our products and services? Before I tell you about how to craft culturally targeted products and services, we need to know a little bit more about the important concept called face. Face is roughly one's reputation or honor. It can be your reputation, your friend's reputation, or the reputation of a relationship. It has many different names in different cultures, but they mean the same thing. Another important note is that it's not your reputation as you see it, it's how you are seen by others, which is an important distinction to how face is seen in the West. In Singapore, we have a website called Wedding Ang Bao, which helps people save face by listing out the amount of lucky money you and everyone else should be giving as a present for weddings, depending on what venue you choose. Why is this saving face? Well, a good example is my dad giving lucky money for my cousin's wedding. He had to call all the relatives to make sure he wasn't giving too much and disparaging the lucky money of his other family members, so hurting their face. Or giving my cousin too little, which makes him look cheap, so he's losing face, and he's also suggesting that he doesn't value my cousin very much, so he's hurting her face as well. So this is the idea of why face is so important and why, for instance, this website had been created. Why is face important in the shark's fin example? Face consumption, as funny as that sounds in English, is basically any purchase of a service or product to protect your reputation, your friend's reputation, or the reputation of your relationship. So shark's fin soup is face consumption. It's not bought for the taste or any functional reason. It's purchased to denote your status and the status of those who you're giving the shark's fin soup to. Why is face consumption super important then? One thing that we know is that face consumption is price immune. So when people are buying for face, they are not buying because they want something that's really, really cheap. It's also not necessarily purchased for practical reasons. So buying something for status doesn't necessarily mean that it's something super, super useful in your everyday life. Face consumption is a symbol of how we feel about our relationships. We can see the same effect online. A study in 2014 showed that Asian and Caucasian online gamers differed in many ways in their motivations to play games, but also in how they maintained relationships. One of the strongest differences was that Asian gamers exchanged virtual gifts in order to solidify friendships. Not only that, exchanging virtual gifts was highly correlated to spending actual money on the game. What does this mean? It means that digitally, perhaps even more so, Asian consumers rely on relationships they have built in considering purchases. More importantly, it focuses on their social relationships. So here is an example of how people can send a gift through their mobile phones, which we'll talk about in a second. So let's check out how you can actually use this for your own businesses. So what we found is that even giving virtual gifts is quite important in fostering real relationships and actually spending real money. So one thing that we can do is check out Gift Launcher, this new a new company started in the Philippines where friends and family vote what gift you should buy someone. Important others essentially choose the gift that is appropriate to give, which is important in protecting face. So allowing your friends to recommend things for you through share buttons, for instance, or evidence that your friends like a certain product or service goes a really long way. A study in 2010 found that a virtual currency on a Chinese online forum was used to help ask for favors and reward posts that people liked. In fact, this year, last year, WeChat allowed virtual payments of red lucky money to be sent through the app itself, with an unprecedented 121,000 envelopes being sent in 5 minutes, and in total, 20 million envelopes being spent. So provide opportunities for gift giving and help users in their quest for gift giving. This can be by providing curated content, providing symbolic gifts to others, and suggesting gifts by social relationship. Also, a study in and another really important thing is to look at how people save face through status cues. So one of the most important things about gifts is not only what the gift is, but also how it's presented. So looking at the presentation, for instance, the wrapping of a present is very important in Asian culture, as it also denotes that a lot of thought and care had been put into it. So in terms of looking at digital, you can also think about how things are presented to others. So looking at not only the design and the layout, but also looking at colors and looking at social cues in terms of how celebrities have endorsed the product. Last but not least, let's talk about how to take your user experience to the next level. So leveling up your personas. Personas are archetypes of different types of target audience members to help people better design for those users in mind. Personas have gotten a bit of dialogue recently because there are two camps, those who think that personas are unhelpful and those who think that they are crucial. I agree with both. I think that personas can be unhelpful, and I think they can actually be misleading. But when done right, I think they're immensely helpful and crucial in user-centric design. A good persona should help you understand and empathize with the user and should give you insight into their needs and wants in order to affect their behavior in positive ways. So let's actually look at an example of the average persona. So this is David Lim. He's 34 years old, born in Australia, has a wife and kids, moved to Singapore to be closer to his parents, works at Ogilvy looking at local brands, and he lives frugally and spent a whole weekend researching for a new guitar for his band. And he also enjoys traveling. He used to backpack, and he likes to take the road less traveled. Great. Unfortunately, what information is it that we're supposed to pay attention to? So the fact that he's from Australia, is that really important? So being an expat in Singapore, is that something that I should pay attention to when I'm designing? How important is family? So it says that he moved to be closer to his parents, but we don't hear anything about his wife or his kid. So is it that he feels a family obligation, or We're not really sure. Also, he works in the creative industry. Is that something that is also important to think about? For instance, he spent a weekend researching on new guitars. So is it important to know that he spends a lot of time trying to figure out what the best purchase is, or is this very specific to musical equipment, since this seems to be a hobby? And the last thing is that he enjoys backpacking. Is that also important? So is it important to know that does he still sort of take the road less traveled, or now that he travels with his wife and his son, he's a little bit more cautious? So in these types of personas, it can be very difficult to find out what is actually important. So demographic personas, this is what I sort of call these types of personas, are ones that focus on social roles and socioeconomic status like careers, age, gender. But the problem is that they can unconsciously trigger stereotypes that could actually interfere with how people interpret the persona. For instance, researchers from Stanford and Harvard show that women who are forced to think about what it meant to be female had more negative attitudes towards math than those who didn't think about their gender, and also found that if they were told that they were taking a math test, they did badly on that test. But if they were told that they were taking a creativity test, they did just as well on the exact same test as men did. So it didn't matter what the test was, it mattered whether or not they thought it was a math test. Another really interesting study looked at how reading words about the elderly actually caused participants to walk more slowly to the end of a hall to reach their destination to the next experiment than those that were not reading about the elderly. And last but not least, people that saw the word professor actually scored higher on a test than those who saw the word supermodel. As you can see, these types of information can have subtle and unconscious effects on how we evaluate people, how we act ourselves, and how we interact with others. Put those into a persona and you could be creating for the wrong person. So let's say I'm an organization that helps support NGOs through donations and brand awareness. I need to create content that will get people interested in helping NGOs. Looking at these two different personas, actually they're the same persona, but one is written as a demographic and the other one is written as a psychographic persona. If I'm a designer, I'm not designing for a lawyer or a lady with 3 kids. In this scenario, her gender is not important, being a dog owner is not important, and being a lawyer is not important. What is important is why she does the things that she does. And now I can generalize it to Bob, who's against animal cruelty, and Valerie, who is for child welfare, who might be moved by the same underlying reasons. So I want to create content that shows people bringing justice back to an unfair situation. I want to highlight power corruption. These will get this persona's head to turn. And to be honest, we're pretty good at using psychographic personas. The zodiac signs don't focus necessarily on demographics, but they focus on motivations, hurdles, and weaknesses, and things that they respond to most to. We've been using this for centuries to figure out people, although let's be clear, these aren't backed by science or data, but ours are. This example of a persona, so for instance, we have to look at not only the triggers, the hurdles, and the motivation. So you can sort of think about it as if you're thinking about somebody running a race. So the finish line would be their motivation, their drive. So where do we want to head? And then you can see the hurdles are the things, the barriers that impede us from getting to our destination. And the triggers you can think of as the shotgun that gets people to start running. So the trigger is something that gets you to remember what your motivation and your drive is. So this is an example of a persona we created for a company exploring why people are interested in nutrition, health, and wellness. We had a beginner, a trainer, and a stress ball. As you can see, a beginner has very different motivations to think about nutrition, health, and wellness. They are reminded about their motivations towards a healthier lifestyle when they feel shame or guilt over eating badly or missing the gym. And they're also thinking about nutrition, health, and wellness when they think about the benefits. They see somebody that has made it. So you can see sort of the triggers, the hurdles, and the drivers that propel them to adopt a healthier lifestyle. There are pros and cons to using psychographic personas. Some of the benefits are that it focuses on aspects that are more predictive of behavior, such as attitudes and motivations. It's easier to put these personas into many different scenarios because they're not hindered by things like their gender or their career, if those are not imperative to the target audience. However, they are harder to measure, and because of that, it's harder to show direct cause effect because you can't give everyone a motivation questionnaire. So how can you utilize the pros and address the cons? Use both psychographic and demographic personas. This will allow you to create boundary conditions on the psychological information. Just remember, be wary of how misleading useless demographic information is. Less is more. And if your personas lack psychographic elements like motivations, hurdles, and triggers, the why essentially, you are reducing the insights that you can gain. So let's recap. I've talked about how we help users to make smarter choices by limiting the difficult decisions they have to make. We looked at how face consumption in Asia part of it is the art of gift giving, and that is quite essential. And I've also talked about improving your user experience toolkit with psychographic personas to get more predictive and insightful value for your audience. Digital is only a medium in which people interact with brands, but it's quickly becoming infused into our everyday lives. We now have unprecedented access to how people act and behave, and we can test out in an environment that allows us to gather in ways that we've never been able to do so before. Businesses need to be smarter about how they interact with their audiences. This means that how we do business needs to be quicker and more interdisciplinary. Reading Room has adopted an agile and iterative process called RAID, which nurtures collaboration from different areas of expertise. Psychology is vital to business, but it has to work in tandem with all the other vital parts to help create great products and services. It should be the voice of the consumer whispering into the ears of the engineers, designers, user experience teams, and the strategy teams. So thanks for listening, and if there are any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm just checking on questions now. So there's about 7 questions there, so we'll go to the first one. So this one from Brian. Is a psychographic persona just for use in digital projects?
That's a good question, because even though we're talking about digital psychology, a psychographic persona is not limited just to digital projects. Just as any type of persona, people are in and out of digital and non-digital environments, so should our personas. Digital is only a medium, but it's something where we could tailor how we present those personas. So we could figure out how their thoughts translate into digital behaviors. So that's sort of like the interesting part of it is, for instance, I might know somebody that is very afraid of risk. They avoid it at all costs. So let me think about how that behavior looks like online. So for instance, they probably browse on review pages longer. They probably visit sites multiple times before they purchase. They probably browse and ask questions in forums more. So this is where the psychographic persona can lead us to make hypotheses about the types of behaviors that you'll see in the digital environment.
Okay, the next question from Helen. Can you provide an example of a psychographic persona leading to a different way of targeting customers?
Yeah. So actually, I had talked about the persona earlier, the beginner. So I can talk about how this type of persona might actually differ in how you target a customer. So one of the biggest triggers, if you recall, for the beginner is it's quite emotional. So let's see if I can go back to this one. Yeah, so for the beginner, a lot of the reasons why they are triggered are emotional ones. So what's important is one thing that we know about how people share information online is that the most viral things are actually the most emotional ones. And so knowing that there are a lot of emotional triggers that the beginner has, we can also look at how to create content that will trigger some of the emotions. So we can think about, for instance, triggering hope by showing success stories of others, or we can trigger guilt to provide them with an incentive to change. These are very visceral and very powerful ways in which to craft a message. So focusing on what their motivations might be is quite helpful in terms of thinking about communication strategies. So hope I answered your question.
One from Christine. When one website is accessed by people of different cultures, how do you take that into account in terms of the cultural triggers?
Sure. So like a lot of different personas, we can expect that people from different cultures probably pay attention to different aspects of the website depending on how important that is in their culture. So if the marketing comes into conflict with cultural values, like for instance, if you think about Western cultures, you can think of uniqueness and individuality might be strong values. That might come into conflict with Asian cultures where, for instance, social bonding and protecting other people's face might be more important than being the best or looking different from everybody else. So we might need to change the message. There are a lot of different ways to actually do this on websites. So for instance, if you know that somebody's coming from an Asian country, you might be able to personalize the type of content so that the more high priority content that you think is relevant to them will be pushed up first. Although that doesn't necessarily always have to be the case. So for instance, when we were talking about recommendations, I was saying that you can actually use them for different purposes. So you can actually kill two birds with one stone. It helps reduce choice problems, which we talked about, but also from a point of view, a cultural point of view, it can also provide status cues. So you can use different sort of markers that can be used culturally to not sort of be too in your face about cultural differences, but to address some of the cultural concerns. So you've got all of them there.
Great. Next question from Joe Lee. So how do you, and I'm assuming that's as a digital psychologist, so how do you work with clients and what is the best starting point for that?
Actually, I think it's our process is actually really good in terms of getting to understand the company from a motivational level. So it's actually quite, to me, it's quite psychological. So I described this process before called RAID. So at the beginning, I want to make sure that I understand the vision of the company and the goals that they have for themselves. And I want to know what behaviors they want from their audience. So it's kind of like I want to know what the target is in terms of the types of behaviors, the types of attitudes that they are looking for. And this can also be something that's internal. So I know I've been talking about customers, but it could also be things like, for instance, if you are introducing something internal like the intranet, you're creating a new process. You also want to know how people are going to respond to these types of changes, what kind of what's going to help them to adopt things more smoothly. So it's not just, and then also what I do is I look at, I have to know all of the different actors, so, or agents, I guess you could say. So for instance, what does the CEO look for? What is going to help the upper management as well? So I need to look at not only the end user, but all of the other people that are going to be using the products and services that we're talking about. So once I can know those things, I can marry the two objectives. So I can marry that I understand these are what the users want, the end users, and now I know exactly what the company's objectives are. I can put those two things together to make sure that it is in line with their objectives and their resources and everybody's happy. So hopefully I answered that as well.
Last question, perhaps we'll cover off on just from Harry. How do I register for the digital readiness webinar? So that's our next webinar. and I will be sending out some details on registration for that shortly. So I might wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you everybody for your time today. When the presentation finishes, please leave your feedback. There's a little pop-up that comes up, and please let us know about any future topics you'd like us to talk about. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.